Good evening, everyone. It's Sunday in time for a new episode of Record Collecting with a Quill. Today we're going to focus on a band that I think deserves a lot more recognition than they usually get. They're a household name, absolutely, in the rock and roll scene, but I think they, as I said, they should be talked about a lot more than we usually do in the rock community. I'm talking about Paul Rodgers, Paul Kossoff, Simon Kirke, and Andy Fraser, and the fantastic band called Free. One of my absolute favorite groups of all time. I don't know why, they're sort of forgotten. They had a short career. They only were a band for about 5 years. And mainly in America, I think Bad Company is a lot more famous since they got a lot more success in America with that band. But Free, their albums are fantastic and a staple, something you all should have in your collection. So I thought I'll talk a little about show you the stuff I have with them, talk a little bit about their albums and some other cool stuff. But before we start, you know the drill. Make sure you subscribe and hit that little notice bell as well and share with your friends. Well, as I said, Free were a band for a short period of time. They started out in 1968, really young. When they formed, bass player Andy Fraser was just 15 years old and the other guys were 17 or 18, so they were really young. Started out in 68 and recorded their first album late 68, came out in 1969, and then they recorded a series of albums up until 1973 when they disbanded and formed other bands. But as I said, I'm going to talk a little bit about their albums. I already mentioned this one, the first one, Free Ton of Subs, recorded late 1968, released early 1969. And a great way to start out an album, or start out a career, I should say. This is basically a recording of their live set at the time they started out playing live, and it's a really bluesy album. You could tell that they came from a blues background. Songs are more or less all in the blues vein. What's great about this album is the playing. As I said, they're so incredibly young, but they play with such. They sound like a really experienced band. Which make this for a great listen. And as I said, there's some fantastic songs here, even though the songwriting between Andy Fraser and Paul Rodgers would evolve quite quickly, and they later on wrote some of the most famous songs in rock and roll history, you could say, with at least one track. But this is a great start. Ton of Subs, as I said, bluesy. Standout tracks, well, there's some really cool. Walking My Shadow is really cool, obviously. I'm a Mover. It's a good example of things to come later on. Next one, just called Free, and this is probably one of my favorite album covers ever. It's such a cool, it's perfect for the late 60s. Great photo and great sort of, I don't know what they superimposed, some stars and stuff here, and also really cool, very typical fold out. And this one is sort of, you can hear that they evolved quite a lot from the first album, even though it's recorded not so far apart. But what's prominent here is Andy Fraser's bass playing is a lot more prominent in the mix here. He has a really unique style, but if the first album is a little more, as I said, on the bluesier side, here is a little bit more focus on songwriting, and they're starting to develop the writing quite a lot. There's some great tracks on this one. I'll Be Creeping. I'm really fond of the last track, Morning Sad Morning. Songs of Yesterday. Yeah, the list goes on. Great second album, Free, called Free. Then came time for the big breakthrough, the Fire and Water album, with one of the most famous rock songs of all time, All Right Now, became a huge hit. And it's sort of everything comes together here. The playing, you can hear that they've been touring extensively. They're super tight as a unit. The songwriting as well comes together really well here as well. So you have a great album all the way through. Title track Fire and Water is really famous. I'm a big fan of Mr. Big. It's probably one of my favorite songs by Free ever. There's some really nice live versions of it as well, which showcases really what the band is about. There's no overplaying at all in Free. On the contrary, they're sort of underplaying everything. They're playing as little as possible, which is the thing I really like about them. There's so much space in their music, and everything can breathe. So there's an example more bands should listen to and sort of try to incorporate in their sound, because they were master of it, these guys. They also played with this one, I must mention the famous Isle of Wight festival. There's a live version of All Right Now that's you can watch on YouTube. I think they're playing to like 600,000 people or something. Great version, great guitar playing from Paul Kossoff there. Next came an album that sort of was a letdown. It didn't sell nowhere near as much as Fire and Water. I think it's sort of probably a reaction to the great success. At least Paul Kossoff testified to it being quite difficult to follow up such an successful album. But this one, being commercially maybe a flop, is artistically a fantastic album. It's sort of a little bit more mellow. You really don't have those standout rock tunes, but the tracks, I think here you have my favorite Free song ever, probably one of my favorite songs ever, called Be My Friend. Beautiful song. But the band was sort of started to sort of cracking here. The relationship between Andy Fraser and Paul Rodgers started to cracking, and Paul Kossoff was having serious drug addiction problems as well. So after this one came out and flopped, they actually disbanded for almost a year. And when a successful band disbands, well, what do the record label do? Well, they usually try to cash in some way, so they released this one, Free Live. I think it's a rather good testament to I know this one sort of gets some people are not so fond of it, but I think it's a good testament to them being a great live album, a great live band. Cool album this as well. It's actually opens up as an envelope, as you can see. That's a cool design. I guess it must have costed a fortune. I also have a Japanese copy of it as well. I think it's a Japanese reissue. Cool to have nonetheless. During that time, they sort of did various stuff, and most of the guys recorded an album without Paul Rodgers. But then they decided to get back together again in 1972, mainly because they were trying to help Paul Kossoff out, who had a hard time dealing with drug addiction and not being in a band. So they got together and recorded this one, Free at Last, which I think is a good album. It's nowhere maybe near the other the previous ones, but there's some great tracks here. I think Catch a Train is cool. A Little Bit of Love is it's great tracks. It's still free, so it's amazing, but maybe not the highs are not as high as on the previous albums. And they were having a hard time with Paul Kossoff here. He was seriously having trouble with drugs. I believe Mandrex was his drug of choice. But they tried, and they credit all the songs to all four members, which wasn't the case with previous albums, to sort of making it a group effort. But Andy Fraser grew tired of the situation and got frustrated and left the band after this album, which is a shame. He's an integral part, a really integral part of Free. But they decided to carry on and record one last album with two new members, Rabbit Bundrick on keyboards and the bass player Tetsu Yamamoto, I believe it's called, from Japan, and recorded this one, Heartbreaker, which I think is a fantastic swan song. Great songs. The title track, Heartbreaker, you have Wishing Well, probably one of the, apart from All Right Now, their most famous songs. What's a little bit shame here is that Paul was in such a bad shape, so they had to get Snuffy Walden to help out on a couple of tracks, which Paul didn't really. He wasn't a big fan of that idea, but nonetheless, he's playing on helping out here on a couple of tracks. But I think this is a fantastic album. As I said, I love everything about it. I love the cool cover. It's a perfect cover. I must get myself a T-shirt with this print someday. But as I said, great songwriter. I think they benefit quite a lot from Rabbit Bundrick's keyboard playing as well. He adds something to the sound which I'm quite fond of for this album. So that's the last one they made. They disbanded. They did a tour. They added another guitarist called Wendell Richardson, I believe his name was, and toured for this. But then they disbanded, and Simon and Paul went on and formed Bad Company. Had great success with that band. Paul Kalsov had a couple of different bands, Backstreet Crawler, and some others, did solo albums, but died 1976. And Andy Fraser did a few solo projects as well, but then sort of went away and died a couple of years ago, sadly. So no Free reunion is possible, I believe. Afterwards, they released, this one came, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, which is a good supplement as well. Free, live at the BBC. There's a bunch of live recordings made for English radio. It's a double CD, some great recordings. Something you really should check out. Also, they released a DVD. I think this is almost 20 years ago. They released this one, Free Forever. Some great live tracks on this one. As I said, there's a fantastic live version of Mr. Big, which I'm really fond of from different TV shows as well. And if you want to read the whole story, I can also recommend this one. Probably a little bit difficult to find, but a really cool read if you find it. The book is called Heavy Load, written by David Clayton and Todd K. Smith. It's the whole story about Free, and it's a lot of cool stories and photos as well. Great book. So if you haven't listened to Free, I suggest you go right away and do it right now. I will put sort of a best of some of my favorite Free tracks on the Spotify playlist. Go check them out if you haven't heard them, and if you have heard them, it's a good time to sort of remember to yourself to listen to them every once in a while, because they deserve it. They're fantastic albums, all of them. Hope you enjoyed. I would love to hear your comment. What are your favorite Free albums or Free songs? Please feel free to comment. And also make sure to follow the QUILL on social media. We released live new Borrowed Blue this Friday. It's out now, so you can listen to a bunch of new QUILL tracks, some cover tunes, some live recordings, and some outtakes from the Earthrise session. So get it now. It's out on CD and streaming, and we're waiting on the vinyl edition. It's quite difficult to get vinyl pressed right now. There's a lot of delays, but it's coming, so hold on. And wait, it will soon be available. We'll post on our social media when it's out. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for listening, and see you all again next week. Bye for now. Cheers.